So Concord cost $400 million to create. That's not factoring in the cost of purchasing the studio that created Concord. That is the total expenditure from Sony and PlayStation for this game that internally they called the future of PlayStation. They likened to Star Wars. I don't know why anybody would liken anything to Star Wars at this point in 2024, but they did. And I feel like this is something that highlights a huge, huge problem when it comes to PlayStation, and maybe some things that they're not really conscious of because they're in this bubble that they've created for themselves, that some of their studios, some of their creators have created for themselves. And there was an interesting discussion that Colin Moriarty had that I listened to. I'm not a subscriber, but I get those little clips that they put on. And his source told him that it cost about $400 million to make Concord, and internally they called it the future of PlayStation, again likening it to Star Wars and the way that they could spin it off and tell stories in the Concord universe. But what was interesting is that the person that he spoke to talked about a culture of toxic positivity. Now, we hear all the time about toxic other things, but we never hear about toxic positivity. And I feel like the people that complain about toxic everything else are really just creating this bubble for themselves. They want to hear that the way they think, feel, act is the only way that everyone should think, feel, and act. So they form these groups and they consistently feed upon themselves this loop of, yes, your idea is fantastic. By the way, I agree with everything that you think. Get out of here, you're kidding. You agree with me on everything? Absolutely. And by the way, there are 400 other people over here, and guess what? What? We all think the same way. Don't you think that's a little bit odd that 400 people all agree on everything? Absolutely not. What are you? That's what's going on. So internally at Concord, nobody could say, hey, these character designs, these aren't great. This doesn't reach a target audience. And by the way, target audience, think about that for a second. I don't know about you, but when I go out and do anything, I do it under the sort of guise of what I am interested in. I look for things that I like. I stay away from things that I don't like. And you probably do that too, because that's normal. But let's say that I was creating something for a market. Let's say I wanted to create a widget. So the first thing I would do, I would say to myself, what kind of widget do I want to create? What's the market for widgets? What's the largest market, and what does that largest market for widgets like? And then I would drive towards that, because guess what? I want as much money as possible, so I'm going to target the base, because they're the largest group. They are the largest group. But instead what happens is, or it seems like what happened, is as soon as Sony moved their headquarters out of Japan and into the United States, there's this idea that the core audience is somehow something that should be ignored, or something that should be sort of chastised for being a core audience. Think about sitting down and saying to yourself, let's make something completely at odds with what 90% of the audience that we're making this product for wants. And then when it fails, let's blame them. We ignored them in the beginning, but now we're going to blame them in the end. Sony needs to get this ironed out quickly. $400 million for Concord. Think about this. I go back before the PlayStation 1. The PlayStation 1 launched, and I played things, like Ape Escape, Spyro the Dragon, Crash Bandicoot. I mean, just countless games that were being created on the PlayStation, from third parties mostly, but the PlayStation 1. Then the PlayStation 2, primarily third parties too, but first party started to ramp up. But think about that. From the PlayStation 1 up until right now, me holding this microphone and talking about this in this video, it is the most money they've ever spent on a first or second party game ever in the company's history. Think about that, and then tell me something isn't very wrong internally. when it comes to what they're greenlighting and what they think their audience wants. And by the way, you know how I know that they know what their audience wants and that they know how to do this? Because they just did it with Astrobot. But unfortunately, I don't know what the sales of Astrobot are, but if you keep driving this core audience into the dirt and all they want is the next big graphically impressive game and then ignore everything else because they know you're ignoring them, what are you left with? If you have an audience that won't respond to something like Astrobot in a huge way, what are you left with? You're left with this Concord nonsense. So I don't think it's difficult to identify an audience if 90% of them like balloons and you're making, shopping carts. Maybe somebody in the boardroom sits up and says, can we take a few of those shopping carts out and put some balloons in there? And everybody says, get out of here. You're not part of our group. You don't think like we do. You're not toxically positive. This is the problem with most modern AAA games. It's why I stay away from modern AAA games, and it's why I'm almost primarily Nintendo. Because they get it. They just make content that's fun. I don't have to think. I don't have to feel. I don't have to wonder about tomorrow in the real world or the next day. I just escape and do something fun, like you're doing in Astrobot, like you've done in Jak and Daxter. Sony needs to get back to that quickly. The largest loss in PlayStation history under Herman Hulst, who loved this game. After they spent $200 million on it, he decided to spend $200 million more. And we talk about Phil Spencer and all the nonsensical decisions that he makes, and he's still making hundreds and hundreds of million dollars a year. How in the world can Herman Hulst lose the most money on a game Sony and PlayStation have ever created? And what's happening? We'll have to wait and see. Thanks for watching the video. Think about liking and subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.